Hello everyone, welcome to Crash Course on React. My name is Kabir from Ashok IT. In this course, we are going to learn React completely in simple and practical way. In this course, we are going to learn React from fundamental till building the projects. So let's get started. Let's understand the crash course agenda. So what are the concepts we are going to learn in this video? We are going to start with introduction to reactjs. We will understand what is React, why we have to learn React. We will discuss about JSX and rules of JSX. We will introduce a build tool called Vite and we will see how we can create our React application using this build tool called Vite. Then we will discuss about components architecture. So what are components? What is functional components? We will discuss. Then we will discuss about props. What are props? Why we use props? We will discuss about state management. We will discuss different hooks what we have in React. We will explore different types of hooks. We will understand how context API works in React for state management. We will see how we can switch from one part of our application to another part of our application in React using React routing concept. Then we will discuss about backend API integrations, form development. We will develop one mini project, and then we are going to discuss about the interview questions. So let's start with introduction to React.js. Introduction to React.js. React.js is a JavaScript library. So what is React.js? It is a JavaScript library. What is this library? A library is a JavaScript file which contains predefined functions, objects, and classes. It means we can say that React.js is nothing but a simple JavaScript file which contains some predefined functions, object, and classes. So what we can do with these predefined functions, object, and classes? That is where the purpose of React comes into picture. The purpose of React is to create user interface. So here, one point we have to understand, React is not meant for developing a front-end application. React is meant for creating user interface. React was created with the intention to create a optimized dynamic user interface. So React is right now the most demanded library in the world to create user interface. React.js is developed and maintained by a Meta team. So there is a developer team in a Meta company which is developed React and maintaining React.js. Nothing but they are introducing new features in React and releasing new versions. Previously, this Meta company was called Facebook. Now, let's try to understand why we have to learn React.js. There are so many libraries and frameworks in the market, but why we have to learn React? The first point why we have to learn React is React.js is most popular library in the world to create UI. React.js is the most popular library right now in the world to create UI. Now, why React is more popular? Because it is simple and easy to learn, especially the people who are beginners, who are entering into the software industry. For them, learning React is much more simple and easy compared to other frameworks and libraries we have in the market. React provides a lot of inbuilt features to create optimized, high-performance single-page application. So just now I said using React, we cannot develop front-end application or a single-page application. But there is a way to do that. How? We are going to see. React has a very rich ecosystem. It means you can integrate other third-party libraries easily with React, which supports React. So that is what the rich ecosystem comes into picture. And React has very big community support and backed by Meta, as I have mentioned. As I have mentioned, React is maintained by Meta company. And there are a lot of developers in the market or in the world who knows React. So it has very big community right now, which will help us to resolve our issues if we fell into any kind of queries. Now let's understand how to create a front-end application with React. Generally, React is meant for creating user interface. We cannot create front-end application, but there is a way. What is that way? Let's try to understand. So to create a front-end application with React, we have to combine or integrate other libraries. Generally, if you want to develop a front-end application, you have to implement a lot of things. Like you have to create user interface, you have to implement styles, you have to implement routing, you have to do API integration, you have to manage data validations. So all those things we cannot manage with React. React is all about creating user interface. So what we can do, we can integrate other libraries like Redux for managing this state, Axios for implementing API integration, React Router for implementing routing, React DOM for managing DOM manipulation, Tailwind CSS for styling the UI components, and Jest for implementing unit testing. Like this, with React, you can combine Redux, Axios, React Router, React DOM, Tailwind CSS, Jest to create a complete front-end application. Now, in this crash course, first we will learn how to create user interface, and then slowly we will see how we can develop other features. Now to create user interface in React, we have to understand a concept of JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript and XML. So JSX is nothing but it is a syntax. It is a new syntax in JavaScript that allows us to create UI components in a simple HTML-like code. It means JSX is nothing but it is just a simple syntax. Using that special syntax, you can create UI components like you can create button, you can create text box in JavaScript by writing HTML-like code, not HTML code, but HTML-like code. Now, why we have to use this JSX? If you are not using this JSX, then creating UI components or UI elements in React is very complex and very difficult. So to overcome that problem, we are going with JSX. JSX makes code easy to read, easy to write, and it is very similar to HTML. JSX code looks like HTML, but it is not HTML. So whenever we write a JSX code, before loading that JSX into the browser, we have to take the help of a special compiler called Babel. So what we are going to do, whatever JSX code we will write, that code we will give to Babel compiler. Babel compiler will convert that JSX code into plain JavaScript object kind of code. And then that code will be loaded in the browser. Let's see practically how we can do that. So before that, we need to understand rules of JSX. So rules of JSX we will discuss after understanding how we can create UI elements with JSX. So let's enter into our practical way. So for this, what we have to do, open your Visual Studio Code IDE. Create one simple HTML file. For example, I am saying UI element.html. So the first step is create one simple HTML file. Second step, add your basic HTML code. Now I'm removing this meta right now. So I have added a basic HTML code. Now inside your body, add one script tag. Now inside this script tag, we are going to write our JSX code. So to write our JSX code, first we have to integrate React. First we have to integrate React with our HTML document. How to integrate? For that, we have to use here script tag. And here we have to add src attribute. So right now I have told React is nothing but one simple JavaScript file. So when I say that, I mean I want to integrate React with HTML, it means I have to integrate one JavaScript file with HTML. And how to integrate? For that, simply we use script tag with src attribute. Okay. Now we need that JavaScript file address or location so that we can integrate. For that, let's go to our browser. So open any browser and type here legacy.reactjs.org. Now, when you visit the official website of React, here you have an option called docs. Now click on this docs. Once you click on this docs, you will land on this page. Now here you have on the right side some links. Click on this CDN links. Once you click on the CDN links, now copy the first link and add inside your HTML file to your SRC attribute. That's it. This is the integration of React with HTML document. Now, once you integrate, now write your JSX code. How to write JSX code? So JSX is very similar to HTML. So how we write HTML code in the same way we have to write just by modifying little bit it. For example, if I want to create one button, how to create button in HTML, just write that code here. So we use button tag, opening tag, closing tag, and we add here some name. So I'm saying React button. So this is how we write or create a button in HTML. Now what we have to do, same way we have to write, and just we have to assign this to one variable. So if you create one JavaScript variable and assign HTML like code, then this code is called JSX code. So JSX is nothing but it is HTML like code which we write in JavaScript file or in this inside the script tag of our HTML document. Now we created here one button element, but this is called JSX element. Now this JSX element, if you directly load in the browser, it won't be visible. So what we have to do, this JSX element, we have to convert into object format. How to convert? For that we required Babel. So what we have to do, we have to integrate Babel with our document. So for that, you have to open again script tag, add src. What is this Babel? Babel is a JavaScript compiler which will help us to convert JSX code into React element, nothing but in a JavaScript object format. So for that, go to the browser and search for babeljs.io. Once you visit on their official website, click on Setup. Then click on In the browser and scroll down. Under this usage, copy this link, or you can directly copy this entire script tag and replace with our script tag. That's it. This is called Babel integration. After Babel integrating, we have to do one more setup. What is that? The script tag inside which we are writing JSX code. To that script tag, we have to assign one type attribute with text/Babel as a value. So you have to go and here you have to add this. Now, once we have done with this, now this React element we have to load in the browser. So to load this React element or JSX element into the browser, what we have to do, we have to integrate React DOM. So take one more script tag here. And simply add src attribute and integrate React DOM. How to integrate? Go to the official site of React. Copy the second link. Go back to your Visual Studio Code and simply add here. It means to create one simple UI component, we have to integrate React, we have to integrate React DOM, we have to integrate Babel with our HTML document. And once we have done with this, From our React DOM library, we have to access one object called React DOM. Using that object, we have to access one render function. And to this render function, we have to give our JSX element, comma. And where you want to load this JSX, I want to load inside this body here. So we have to access the DOM element of the body and pass as a second argument to render function. So here we can go with tag, yeah, let's go with query selector. Something like document dot, we can use query selector. And here simply we can pass body. Now if I load this, I got here one button on the screen. So we just learned how to create one simple button using our JSX element and React. But this is like creating UI. But we don't want to stick with creating only UI. We want to create a front-end application so that we can create UI in that, we can style the UI, we can implement API integration, data management, data validations, routing, all those things we can do. So for that, we have to use one build tool called Vite. We have to use one build tool called Vite. Using that build tool called Vite, we can create a React front-end application, a basic front-end application. In that front-end application, we can integrate React and other libraries to implement other features. So now let's see how we can create our first React front-end application using Vite tool. So let's understand how to create React application. How to create React application with the help of Vite tool. So generally we write it as a VITE, but we have to pronounce it like VEET. So Vite is a modern build tool used to create and run a front-end applications like React application, Vue application, and etc. So to create a front-end application, we need this Vite tool. Now to get this Vite tool, we have to simply make sure that Node.js is installed in our system. So once Node.js is installed in your system, then you can use this command to create the React application. And that command is npm space create space Vite @latest and your application name. So let's see how we can do that. So for that, go to your Visual Studio Code, open your terminal, and simply here you have to use the command npm space create space Vite @latest space your application name if you want, or else you can right now you can stick with this npm space create space Vite @latest. Now press on enter. When you press on enter, it will ask you a few questions. First, it is asking you, do you need to install this Vite new version? I will say yes, install it. Then it will ask you, what is the name you want to give for your application? I'm saying something like ecom app. Then it will ask you, this ecom app, for which framework you want to create. So here, basically we have to select React. So again, don't get confused. React is not a framework, it is a library. But in this configuration, they have just used framework. Okay. Now you can select React and press on enter. Now it will ask using which language you want to create this front-end application. We want to go with JavaScript. So select JavaScript. Now it is asking you, do you want some experimental version of beta? Right now you say no. It is asking you to install with npm and start development server. Just say yes. So now it will start creating your React application. Now Vite is a build tool which will help us to create React application and manage React application by providing one internal development server. And now using this V tool, we can compile our React application. We can host our React application in local development server provided by same V tool, and it provides one URL to us using which we can access our React application in the browser. Okay. So here we just got some error. Let's try again. So same command we have to use npm space create space vite @latest. Enter. Just say ecom app. We want React. We want JavaScript. No. Yes. Now here our React application is created. And if you see, it is providing us one URL. So you can access this URL and go to the browser and simply paste that URL and press on enter. You will be able to see this user interface, something like Vite plus React. The moment you get this kind of UI, then you can confirm that you successfully created a React application. So now let's explore our React application. So let's go to our Visual Studio Code. Now this is our React application. Now if I expand our React application, you will see some bunch of folders and some bunch of files. In this, the first folder is node modules. It contains all the packages, all the libraries that are required to create this front-end application. So node modules is a collection of libraries. In public folder, right now you have just one SVG file. So even if you delete this public folder, no problem. Now next folder is SRC. This is our main folder. Now in this folder, you will find JS files, CSS files, and JSX files. If you want, you can create even JSON files here. So SRC is the folder where we are going to work. This is the only folder on which we are going to write our React code. We are going to write our JSX code. Next, .gitignore is related to Git. ESLint, it contains the configuration of your development. So generally when we are working in a team, then what are the standard rules you have to follow? All those rules will be configured here. Next, we have index.html file. This is the file right now which is loaded in our browser. This is the only HTML file we will have in our application. Next, package-log.json. Package-log.json is a file which contains all the information of modules which are present in node_modules file. So in node_modules folder, whatever packages are present, all those packages information you will find in package-log.json file. So this file almost contains 800, not 800, it's almost like 3000 lines of code. So whatever packages you have in node_modules folder, all those packages information you will find. Next, you have package.json. Now, package.json is a file which contains a brief information about your application. Like when you are creating this application, what are the main dependencies? What are the dev dependencies? What is your application name? Which version of application it is? Which module system it is working? All those things. Next, we have readme.md. This is a file which is related to Git for the documentation purpose. And we have vite.config.js file. Now this file contains the configuration of your build tool. But as a React developer, we are not going to work on this file. We are not going to work on ESLint file. We are not going to work on .ignore. Our work is to work only on SRC folder. So as a developer, our work is to just work on SRC folder. Now this is the folder where we are going to create all our CSS file, JS files, and your JavaScript files. And we are going to enhance this front-end application by adding our own code to make it customized application. So now let us understand how we can create a component in React.js. But before that, let's understand a little bit about what is component. A component is a specific reusable part of user interface that represents how a piece of the app looks and behaves. Nothing but a component is nothing but it represents a part of user interface on your screen. Now that part can be a single UI element or it can be combination of multiple elements. So whenever in React we want to create any UI, we generally create something called component. Component are of two types. The first one is functional component, second one is class component. So right now in the class components are outdated in the market. No one uses class components. The present and the future of React is completely functional component. So let's understand what is functional component. A functional component is a simple JavaScript function that starts with a capital letter, take props as an input and returns JSX. Any JavaScript function whose name starts with uppercase, nothing but capital letter, and it takes 0 or 1 parameter called props and returns JSX. Now such JavaScript functions we are going to call as a functional component. Now why we use this functional component? So generally the JSX code which we have learned how to write, that JSX code we are going to use inside this functional component. So without functional component also we can write JSX code, but the problem is we cannot reuse that JSX code. We cannot pass a dynamic data to that JSX code. Whenever you have a requirement to reuse your JSX code or to pass a dynamic data to that JSX code, we go for functional component. So we create one functional component and in that we write our JSX code. Functional components supports hook. They are preferred and modern way to build React application. So generally there is a concept of hooks in React. And these hooks concept are supported in functional component only. They are not supported in class components. Okay, so now let's try how practically we can create a functional component. So for that you have to follow some rules. So let's go to our Visual Studio Code. Now this is the application which we have created. So inside this src folder you can create one subfolder called components. Now for each component you create one more folder. For example, let's assume that I want to create header component. So I will create one folder with header. Now inside this header folder you can create one file called header.jsx. So the first step to create component is to create header one JSX file. Now inside this JSX file you can just write your code. So the first step is you have to create one subfolder called component. Inside that you have to create one more folder called header and then you have to create one file. So let's try this once again. So I'm just deleting this part. So first inside your src, so let's understand how to create component. So to create component, first inside the src you have to create one subfolder called component or components. In that subfolder called components you create one more subfolder for your component. For example, I am creating header subfolder for creating header component. If I want to create footer, I will create footer subfolder. Now in each folder, nothing but in each subfolder of your component, create one JSX file. So just create one simple JSX file. Once you create JSX file, now inside this you create component. So what is functional component? It is a simple JavaScript function whose name starts with uppercase, which returns JSX. So I am writing one div. So this is JSX. Now this component can take one parameter, that is props. So like this we can create one simple component. And inside this I am just adding one heading element and mentioning here header component. Now in the same way, suppose if I want to create one more component, Now inside this footer folder, I will create one footer.jsx file and create one functional footer component. How to create? Simply you have to create one function and give some name to your function. Make sure function name starts with uppercase. Return some JSX code h1 and here you say footer component. Now whatever components you have created, you export it, because we want to render, we want to use this component in some other file. So for that, export default your component name. Here also simply you have to use export default your component name. So what we have done, we have created header component, we written some JSX code, we are exporting it. We created footer component, we have written some JSX code and we are exporting it. Now I want to show this component UI on my screen. For that, go to your app.jsx file. Now in app.jsx file, you will find lot of code. Just select all the code, remove it and recreate here one app component. And inside this app component, we have to render our header and footer component. So before that, let's export our app component. And to use our header and footer component, first you have to import. First you import your header component here and then import footer component. So once you import header component, once you import footer component, then inside this JSX, we can simply write h1 or not h1. Here we have to render our header and footer component. Render header, render footer. How to render? Just like our element format, like our tag format. This is called rendering header component, rendering footer component. Now save your file and just go to your browser and check the output. Now see, here we got header and footer, and see here some CSS we are able to see. So what we can do, we can go back to our application. In our application, under src folder, there is one file called index.css, and by default you will see some CSS code is written. So what you have to do, just select all the code and remove it and save your file. And now go back to the browser and check the output, that CSS will be removed. So now here we are able to see our header component and footer component. So we have just seen how to create a functional component in reactjs. Now let's create one more functional component called main component. So for that, let's go to our Visual Studio Code. Now whenever you have a requirement to create a component, go to src folder. Inside that src folder, you will find one subfolder called components. Under that subfolder called components, you create one more subfolder for your component. So I am creating main. Now inside this main subfolder, you create one JSX file, main.jsx. And now inside this JSX file, create one component. How to create? Function, your component name, open curly brace, close curly brace, add return statement, add your div, and then export your main component. And now inside this main component, let's suppose I am adding one paragraph and generating some random content. Now to this paragraph, I want to add some styles. For that, inside this main folder, we will create one CSS file. Now this CSS file we have to link with our JSX file. How to link? For that, let's go to our JSX file, and here you have to simply write import space in double quotes you have to write dot slash main dot JSX main dot CSS. You have to give the path of your file, and now you can add here a class name called main. You can select that class using class selector, and you can add whatever CSS you want. I'm just making it green, adding some background color black, assigning some padding 20 pixel. Now this main component I want to show on my screen. So for that, what I am going to do, I will go to my app component. Here I will import my main component first, and let me render this main component here. Now save it, go back to the browser and check the output. You are able to see the main component. Now if you want to reuse it, you can reuse it as many times you want. Now in between header and footer I want to render main. I can reuse it. If I want one more, I can render. If I want one more, I can render. Any number of times I can render. And if I go back here, I'm able to reuse it. So like this, we can reuse our components any number of times. So just now we have seen how to create one simple functional component and how to render that component. Yeah, so now let's try to understand how we can create one simple card using a functional component. So for that, let's go to our src folder. Inside this src folder, already we have this components folder, and we have some 3 subfolders, right? Footer, header, main, and we have seen how to create that footer, header, main component. Now in same components folder, I will create one more subfolder called card. And in this card folder, I will create card.jsx file, and let's create card.css file. Now in card.jsx, let's create a card component, and let's connect our card.css file here. Now let's check whether this card component is visible on our screen or not. For that, let's go to app.jsx, import our card component, and let's render card component here. And if I save and go back to my browser and check, now card component is visible. Now let's go to card component and let's design UI. So for this, what we are going to do, to this card div, we will assign one class called card. We will select this div in our CSS file. Now to this CSS file, we will assign, to this particular card selector, we will assign some width like 300 pixel. Let's assign some height 400 pixel, and let's add box shadow 0, 0, 10 pixel, something like black. And let's use some margin 50 pixel from top bottom, and yeah, just we will keep 50 pixel. And now if I go and check my output, I should get this card shape. Now in this card, I want to add one image. For that, let's get to our code. Now inside this div, let's assign one image element. To this image, let's assign some width something like 100%, and height we will assign something like 230 pixels. And let's assign one src attribute to that, some link. So I will take here some male professional images. So I got one image, I will select this image and get back to our VS Code, and let's assign here. Save your file, again get back to the browser and check here our output. So we got that image. Now here I want to add username. So to add username, I will take h2 element and I will simply add here some user, something like Rajiv Shukla. Let's take a paragraph element, let's add some description of 11 words, and let's add one simple button, something like profile details. And now if you go back to your browser, you got like this. Now all this content I want here in the center. So for that, let's go to the CSS file of card and add text align center. Save your file, get back to the browser and check the output. So this is the UI we got right now. So what I want to do, this heading I want to show in some other color. So for that we can select in our card whatever h2 is there, that h2 color I want maybe in the green. And it's in the same way, whatever paragraph I have, that paragraph font style I want to make italic. And in my card, whatever button I have, to that button let's assign some padding, 15 pixel, 30 pixel, and then let's remove the border. Let's assign background color green, and text color make it white. Border radius we will add 10 pixel. So some CSS properties I have assigned to this button, and let's check how our button looks like. So we got something like this. So what we can do, little bit card height we can increase. So 420 if I give, and if I just check, it looks like this. Or maybe if I can try 410, save it and go and check, we got like this. So we are able to create one simple card. And how we have created this card? Using a functional component concept. So here we created one card component. Now if I want this card component, I can use multiple times. So here I can use like this 4 times. And if I go back to my browser, 4 cards will be displayed. Now my requirement is all these 4 cards should be displayed in the same row. So for that, we can add one class to this div, something called app. We can integrate app.css file here, and in app.css file you can, already some code is there, you can remove that code. You can select your app and you can make it display flex. The moment you make it display flex, all the cards will display in one row. And now I just want to generate equal space among them. So for that, I will use here justify content space evenly. Save it, again go back here, we got like this. We can add flex wrap if you want, and we can add wrap. Again save and go and check, we got like this. So we got here 3 cards and 1 card in the bottom. So if you want, you can decrease little bit width of the card. So right now how much we have given, 300, right? If I give 270 and check, we got something like this. I'm just trying to keep all the cards in one row. 230 if I give and get back here again, I got like this. Okay, so here let's keep it 270 only, and for our display flex, justify flex wrap. Yes, we got like this. Okay, now my requirement is in every card I want to show different image, different username. So how to make our component dynamic? So to make our component dynamic, we are going to use a concept of props. Props is nothing but it is like a input data giving to your component. So in our case, component is nothing but a function. So to this function, I want to provide one input data. How to provide? Using parameters and argument concept. But how to pass arguments when we are calling our component or rendering the component in a tag format? For that, we are going to pass the input data in a attribute format. For example, here I can say name equals to Rajiv Shukla. I can add here also name equals to Rohan Verma. Here I can add one more, name equals to Ajay Reddy. I can add here one more, name equals to something like Sajan Patil. So like this, we can add one attribute to our card rendering logic. Now this is like attribute, key and value pair, key and value pair. When you are rendering same component multiple times, make sure that your attribute key names are same. Values can be different, but across same component rendering, attribute names should be same. Now these attributes in React we are going to call as a props. A props is a property of component. A props is used to pass as an input data to the component. Now what I can do, I can take this props and I can bind to my JSX element. So how to access this props in card component? For that, in our card component, we have to take one parameter called props, or you can simply destructure it, because the first parameter in your component is always object type. So whatever argument you are passing here, whatever attribute you are passing, whatever props you are passing, this props will go and store inside this parameter. And how to access? So this Rajiv Shukla you can remove from here. Now here I need to write some JavaScript code inside this h2. So for that, first add curly brace and then use this props dot username. So generally this props is a object. This props is like one object, and in this object your this attribute, nothing but this props will go and store like this. So how to access this Rajiv Shukla? How to access? Simply we have to say props.name. Now if I go back to my browser, you will see that in all the cards name got changed. Now suppose if I want to change image also, so what I have to do? I have to just go back here to my card rendering logic. Here I have to add URL, and that URL I have to mention here. Here also URL I have to mention. Here also URL I have to mention. Here also URL I have to mention that URL. So let's go to the browser. Let's pick this image URL. Let's add to the first user. In the same way, I want other users URL. So I will search for some male professional images. I will pick this URL, copy the image link, go back to your code, add to the second part. So here I have added URL to all the card rendering, and different URLs I have added. Now that URL will be again added inside this object as a second property like this. Now this URL value we have to bind with this image element. What we can do, we can remove this URL from here and simply add curly braces and pass your props dot URL here. Save it, go back. Now you should be able to see different images on your screen. So basically what we have done, we have just added input data to our component using a concept of props. So what is props here? So props is a property, or you can call input data to your component. So here I can say name is one props, URL is one props. So card component is taking two props, nothing but two input data. And how you are holding this two input data, you are holding here using the first parameter, which is object type. Now it is not mandatory that you have to take here name as a props only. You can take whatever name you want. Whatever name you want, you can take it. Now if you want to add different styles for app, you can do that. So here if I want, I can make it width like 1200 pixel. If I make it 1200 pixel and if I go back here, now if I refresh, now I got something like this. So 4 cards we are able to display here. So till now we have understood what is React, what is the purpose of React, how we can create a front-end application with React, what is JSX, how to create a component using our React in a functional way. Hello everyone. So in today's session, let's try to understand about state concept in reactjs. So what is state and what is the purpose of this state, what we can do with this state. So let's begin. What is state? A state is a variable that stores data. So what is state? Basically a state is a normal variable in which we can store any type of data. You can store string type of data, you can store number type of data, object type of data, whatever data you want you can store. And that state variable we can bound or we can bind with our UI. Now, whenever you create a state variable and if you bind that state variable with your UI, then in your UI, whatever data you have stored in this state, it will be displayed. What is the meaning of this? Let's try to understand with a diagram. So here I will open a paint file. So here I will open a paint file. Now in this paint file, let's assume that I have created one component. I have created a component. Now in this component, I am displaying some UI. Maybe for example, I am displaying one button. Like this, I am displaying one button. Now my requirement is on this button here, I want to add some text. And this text I want to make it dynamic. So what I can do, I can create one state variable. I can create like this one state variable in my component. Inside this state variable, I can store some data. For example, I am storing something like login. I am storing one string, something like login. And now this state I can bind with my UI. Here I can bind it. So whenever I bind this state with my UI, whatever data you are storing in this state, that data will be visible. Now, if you want to change this data, if you want to change the data of the UI, what you have to do on doing certain action, like on maybe click of the button or maybe on change of any kind of day element or on any kind of action, what we can do, we can simply update this data. So if you update your state data on certain action, so I am removing login and here I am, let's assume that I am adding here something like AIT. In that case, what happens? Your React will take care of updating this AIT inside your button. So the button text becomes dynamic. So this is how state is going to help us to make our UI dynamic. So what is state basically? It's a variable that stores the data and we can bind that data to the UI. Now state automatically updates the UI when its value changes. Just now I have explained in the diagram. Whenever you update that state, automatically it's update your UI. State is created. Now if you want to create this state, then the state is created using the useState hook inside a functional component. So if you are using a functional component to create UI, then you can create this state variable using a hook called useState. And once you create this state, you can store some data in that state, and that state you can bind with your UI, so that in your UI the data will be displayed. Now why we use this state? As I have mentioned, the state we use just to make our UI dynamic. This is the main reason why we use this state. Now let's see how we can create this state. How to create a state? So for that, first we have to import a useState hook. So like this, we have to import one useState hook. Once you import useState hook, then you can call useState hook in your component. When you call this useState hook in your component, it returns one array. Now that array you can destructure, and in that you can add two references like count and set count. Now here the first element of that array is your state variable. In this state, if you want to store any default value, then you can pass that data as an argument to useState. If you pass any data as an argument to useState, that data will be stored inside your state variable. So in this array, this is your state variable, this is your setter function. So here, as I have mentioned, the first element is your state. Okay, let's see practically this part now. Let's go to VS Code, and here let me create one folder called state, and let me add here one file something like counter.jsx. Now let's create our component. So I am using here shortcut to create my component. So functional component is created. Now here I am adding one h1, and I am placing a variable text like count, and here I want some value. Okay, and let's add one button here called increase count. Now to this div, let me add some style. Let's add padding equals to 50 pixel. Save it and go to the browser. So we can go to the browser here. So here it's not visible. So what we have to do for that, we have to render that component first. Go to app.jsx. Here you can import your counter component, and then we have to render that counter component here. So here I will render my counter component. So if I refresh and go back to my browser, it will be like this. Okay, so let's do one thing. Let's remove these cards which we have created. Save it and go back here. We got here count. So now here what I want, here I want to show some value like 0 or 100. So to show some value here, what we are going to do, first we will go to our component. Here we will import our useState hook. So from React library, we will import useState hook and simply call that useState hook. Whenever you call this useState hook, it returns one array to us. That array I can destructure, and here I am giving two variable names like state, comma, set state. So remember, whenever we call useState, it returns one array. That array contains exactly two elements. It contains state and it contains set state. Now this state is nothing but your first variable. Set state is nothing but it is a setter function. Now in this state I can store some data. So if you want to store any default data inside this state, then that data you have to pass as a first argument to this useState. Suppose if I pass 100, now this 100 will be stored inside this state. Now this state I can bind here, save the file, go back to the browser. You will see that 100 is visible. Suppose if I store string type of data in my state, suppose here I am storing Kabir, and if I save and if I go back here, it will show Kabir. It means whatever you store inside this state, that data will be visible on your UI. Now suppose if you want to update this data, so what you have to do for that, you have to call this set state. So right now what I will do here, I will store 0. And now my requirement is whenever I click on this button, that 0 should get updated here. So let me save my file and let me go back to the browser. Now 0. If I click on this button, I want to increase this count. So how to do that? For that, let's go back to our UI. Now this is our button. Whenever you click on this button, on click, you have to call one function called increase count. But we don't have this function. So what we can do here, we can define that function. How to define? Just I am using here arrow function syntax. Const increase count equals to one function. Now guys, here you have to focus on one thing. In JavaScript, we write on click in lowercase like this. And if you want to call any function, here we add double quotes. And then we add here parenthesis. Basically, we pass our function call. This is what we do in JavaScript. But in React, what you have to do, this on click we have right. This on click word you have to write in camel case. It means on should be in the lowercase and click C should be in the uppercase. And here instead of double quotes, you have to add curly brace. And inside this curly brace, you just need to pass the function name which you want to call on click of this button. So whenever I click on this button, I just want to call this function. So I won't pass the function call. I will be passing function name here. So how to pass? Simply you have to say here increase count. Save it. Now you are saying that whenever this button is clicked, this function should be called. And whenever this function is called, I want to update this value from 0 to 1. So for that, inside this function, we have to call this setter function. So what is set state? Now set state is a setter function. Using this setter function, we can update the value of this state. So simply call this setter function here. And whatever current count value is there, you can access that current count value and you can add 1 to it. So the moment you say state plus 1, now that data, whatever current state is there, current state is 0. So when you say 0 plus 1, it will be like 1 and set state will update that 1 inside this state and your component will re-render. So if you go to the browser, you will see that if I click on this, I got 1. Again, if I click 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 like this. Like this, we can increase the count. Suppose if I want to decrease the count. So for that, again, I will go to my Visual Studio Code. I will create one more button. I will say decrease count. So whenever we click on this button, I will call one function called decrease count. And let's define that function const decrease count equals to one function. And here simply I will call set state and I will say state minus 1. The moment I say state minus 1 and if I go back here, you got like this. Now see, if I click on this, count increasing. If I click on this, count is decreasing. So what we have done, this data in our UI, we made it dynamic. Now if you want this state, you can bind anywhere in your UI. If I want, I can bind here also. Like this, I can bind state here. Now if you see on this button, we got it. Here 10, here also 10. Click on this, increasing. Click on this, here also decreasing. So you can create whatever UI you want, and on that UI, if you want to show some data, then directly we will not append that data in our UI. we will create one state. Inside that we will store the data, and that state we are going to bind with our UI. Now whatever data you have in this state, that data will be displayed in the UI. Now if you want to update the data of the UI, just you have to update that state. And how you will update that state? For that you have one setter function. So if you call that setter function and if you pass your new data, then that setter function is going to update the data in this state, and once your state is updated, your React will update that data in your UI. And the process of updating the UI data based on state value is called re-rendering. So many times in React we are going to use a term called re-rendering. So what is re-rendering? Re-rendering is nothing but updating the UI data based on our state value. Okay, so let's take one more example. Now let's create one card. Okay, already we created one card in the last class. So let's take that card. So let's go to our app.jsx and let's import our card component. I think already it is imported. So let's render it, just render it. So if I go back here, one card is created. Now let's hard code some URL here, some image URL. So for that, let's go to the card component. Now here I am using props. Now I don't want to use any props, so I will remove this. I don't want to use any name of the user, I will remove it. So now what I want in this particular card, here I want to display one image, here I want to display username. So for that I will create one state here. So let's assume that this is our card. Now in this card component I will create one state. In this state I will maintain my image URL. I will create one more state. In this state, I will maintain username. And now this state I will bind with my image src attribute. This state I will bind with my h2 element. So whatever data you have in this state or whatever URL you have, that will get appended to src. Whatever data you are storing in this state, it will be added in your h2. Okay, let's see here. So first let's create two state. So for that, first we have to import useState hook from React. Call that useState hook. So whenever we call this useState hook, it returns one array to us. So let's hold that array by destructuring, and let's add here image comma set image. These are just reference name, you can take whatever you want. In the same way, I will use here const. Here I will say name comma set name, and here also I will add useState. Okay, now this image I will bind here, this name I will bind here. Now let's add here some image, some user, some male user image, and here male user name, something like Rajiv Shukla. If I say Rajiv Shukla and if I go to my browser, you will see that Rajiv Shukla is displayed here. Now let's pick some male professional images. Now let me just pick this image. Now I have to get the address of this image. I'm getting the address. I will go back here and I will place inside this state. So now this URL we are storing in image state, this name we are storing in name state. This image state we are binding with src attribute, this name state we are binding with h2. Now if I go back here, you will see that one image is displayed, Rajiv Shukla is displayed. Now here I want update profile. Here instead of profile details, I want here text like update profile. Okay, so let's add two buttons here. Let's add one more button. If I just check how it looks like this. We can decrease little bit CSS for the button. Here I will add 7 pixel, 15 pixel. So if I just go and check, I got like this. So instead of 7, can we add 11? We got like this. And let's add some margin right 10 pixel. We got like this. Okay, now what I want, on my first button I want here name as Rajiv, and on my second button I want here name as something like Seema. So if I go back here, I have here Rajiv and Seema. Now my requirement is very simple. If I click on Seema, I want Seema data here, Seema image, Seema name. If I click on Rajiv, I want here Rajiv image, Rajiv name. So for this, what we are going to do, whenever we click on this Rajiv, we will define one function here. So if you want, instead of passing one function name here, we can directly define one function here. And inside this function, I will call first set URL. And I will call here set name. And in the same way, what I am going to do, so here not set URL, what is the name we have taken? Set image, okay. It should be set image. Now what I will do, on this function also I will do the same. On click, I will add the same thing. Now whenever user will click on this Seema, what I want to do, this set image, I want to update with Seema image URL, and here name I want to update with Seema Reddy. Now let's go back here. Let's pick some female professional image. Now let's assume that she is Seema. Let's get this image. Let's go back here and let's paste here. So what we are doing basically, whenever user will click on this Seema button, we are calling this function. Internally this function will call set image. What set image will do? It will just update this URL inside this image state. And whenever URL will get updated in image state, that URL will get reflected here. In the same way, whenever set name is called, what we are doing? We are passing Seema Reddy. Now Seema Reddy will be updated inside this name, and whenever Seema Reddy updated, here you will get Seema Reddy. So now let's see. You go back here. Now if I click on Seema, I should get here Seema Reddy, but see, image is not changed. Now update here. Here set image we have done. Yeah, see, here we got updated. Okay, so it took little time to load. That is the reason. Let's try again. Let's refresh first. Now this is male. This is Rajiv Shukla. If I click on Seema, I got Seema. I got Seema Reddy. Now if I click on Rajiv button, then I want here Rajiv image, Rajiv name. So whenever you click here, we should have Rajiv Shukla, and we want same this image only. We want whenever we click on this button. Now go back here. Now if you refresh, now here we got Rajiv image, Rajiv name. If I click on Seema, I got Seema image, Seema name. If I click on Rajiv, I got here Rajiv name and again Rajiv image. So we are able to update the data of our UI on click of this button. So this is how we can use state concept to update our UI data. Let's understand a context API concept. So what is context API? A context API is a technique to share the data of the application. So what is context API? A context API is a technique to share the data of the application. So you can share the data from one part of your application to the another part of your application. Using context API, generally we share the data from parent component to child component. Now recently, like few minutes back, we have understood that in React we can create lot of components. Now sometimes you will get a requirement to share the data from one component to another component. Now whenever you have the requirement to share the data from one component to another component, we use context API. Generally, context API we use to share the data from parent to child component. So there are three types of relationships which we can create between the components: parent-child, child-parent, and sibling. And context API is a technique which is explicitly used if you want to share the data from parent to child. It resolves the issue of props drilling. Suppose if you are not using context API, then we have a props concept. So if there are 5 components which are in parent-child relationship in a particular series, for example, A component child is B, B child is C, C child is D, D child is E. And if you have a requirement to share the data from A to E, then we can go with props. Props means from A to B we will give the data as a props, from B to C again we will give the data as props, from C to D again we will give the data as a props. Now this process of giving the data from A to B, B to C and C to D and D to E is called props drilling. So to overcome these issues, because if you go with this props drilling approach, there are a lot of complexities we have to deal with. That is the reason we don't recommend this props drilling approach. So to overcome this particular problem, we are going to use context API. Context API is used for managing the data of the application, as we have discussed. Now, it is not recommended to use context API if you want to share the data from child to parent or in between two siblings. If you want, you can do, but it is not a recommended way. Now, let's try to understand how we can implement this context API. So, steps to implement context API. The first step is we have to create the context. Second, we have to render a provider component in a parent component using our context. So let's understand this with an example. So what we have to do, so let's assume that you have component A, component B, you have component C, you have component D, and component E. Like this, your components are arranged. And now you have a requirement to share the data from A component to E component. In between that, you have here B component, you have here C component, you have here D component. Now if you have a requirement to share the data from A component to the E component. So one way is we can go with props. From A we can give the data to B, from B we can give the data to C, from C we can give the data to D, from D we can give the data to E. But this approach is very complex. So to overcome this problem, what we are going to do, we are going to create first context. Now whatever data you have in A component, this data we will store in this context. So data will be stored in this context. Now which component wants the data? E component wants the data. A will simply take the data from the context. This is the actual concept. So now here first we need to create the context. And then this context we have to make available to A so that A can store the data. And once this A is storing the data in the context, then this context we have to make available to B, C, D, E component so that any child component can access the data from that context. So let's see how we can implement this practically. So for that, let's go to our Visual Studio Code. First, let's design our components. Context API. Now here I am saying 8.jsx b.jsx. Here I have c.jsx. Let's create one more file, d file, and one more file, that is e file. Now let's design some UI in all the components. First I will create a component and simply I will add one heading. I will say a component. And now here I can add one class called a context. Now we can go back to our index.css file, which is a global file. A context we can select and we can assign some width like 800 pixel, padding 20 pixel, and let's add text align, not text align, let's add box shadow some 10 pixel black. Now let's see how this a component looks like. So for that, let's go to our app.jsx. Let's import a component and render that a component here. Now if I go back to my browser, we got here a component. Now let's add some margin top, something like 20 pixel. Now let's design B component. Here I am adding h1, I am saying B component. Now to this B component, let's add a class name called B context. We will select this B context now. Let's assign some width like 600 pixel, padding 20 pixel, box shadow 10 pixel red. And now if I go back here, I got B component not visible, so we have to render that B component inside the A component. So import B and render inside the A component. And now if you check, we got like this. Now in the same way I want C and D. So let's copy this code and let's add in the C and just replace this B with C. Now here we can use C context. Let's go back here, let's copy this and let's add here C context, reduce to 400. Here let's make it blue. And now again if I go back to B and if import C component and render C component. Let's do the same thing with D. So let's go to index, let's add here first D, decrease to 200 and here let's make it as green. And let's go to the D component, create D component, add h1 and just say D component. Style class, let's add a class called D context here. Save it, go back to the top of C component, import here D component now. And let's render D component here. So now if you see here, app component child is A child is B. So here A child is B child is C and C child is D. Now let's go back and let's add here. So we got A, B, D, and for C we are not getting any box shadow. Let's check. For C here it should be C. So we have done creation of our components. Now if you see, we have arranged our components in a parent-child relationship. Now A component is a parent of B, B is a parent of C, C is a parent of D. Now our requirement is we want to share the data from A component to the D component. So for that, let's maintain a data in a component. So let's go to our Visual Studio Code. Now in A component, we will create one state and we will maintain the data. Let's suppose I am maintaining the data one string as a Kabir. Now the data is present in this state and the state is present in A component. So here we can see that A component contains the data. Now what we want to do, this A component data we want to display in the D component. Here I want to display. So for this, first what we are going to do, we are going to create here one context. How to create context? For that, we will create one JavaScript file, context.js. In this JavaScript file, we will import one function from React library. And what is that function name? The function name is create context. Now we call this create context function. The moment you call create context function, one context will be created. And that context is going to return the reference of the context which is created. Nothing but when you call create context, it creates a context and it returns the reference of that context. Now that reference I am storing in one variable, I will say my context. And now this my context I will export from this file. So the first step is you have to create the context. Now next what we have to do, now this context, inside this context we have to store the data of A. So if you want to store the data of A in this context, first this context we have to import in A component. So let's go to our A component. And here let's import our context. Once you have imported, then inside this A component JSX, render a provider component using your context. How to do that? For that, you can simply open angle bracket, write your context name, then say dot and call provider component. So what we have to do here, we have to simply render the provider component. Now this provider component we can access from the context, where we have to render inside the JSX of A component. Then to this provider component you can pass one props called value, and to this props you can pass your component data as a value. So here props key name is value only, we have to write value only. Now in this curly braces we can pass our state. So if you are passing the statements, you are storing that data called Kabir inside the context. It means basically this state you are giving to provider. Provider will store that data in the context. Now next what we have to do, the child component of A component is B. So this B component we have to render inside this opening and closing tag of provider component. So if you render this B component as a children inside the provider component, then whatever data you have in the context, it is available to B component, plus it is available to the childrens of B component also. Now who are the childrens of B component? C component, D component, E component, or in future if you have much more components. Now we want the data in D component. So if you want the data in the D component, first here we have to import use context hook from React. Now use context is one of the hook in React using which we can access the data from the context. So you created context, you stored some data. Now how to access the data from that context? For that we have a hook called use context. So first import that use context hook. So simply here import use context hook. And to this use context hook, pass your context from which you want to access the data as a first argument. So for that, first we have to import our context and pass this context here. Now it returns the data of that context stored in one variable. And now this data you bind here. Save it, go back to the browser. You will see that Kabir is displayed. So Kabir is present in A component, but we are displaying here in the D component. So if you want, we can increase the width of the D component. I will make it 300 pixel. I got like this. Now suppose if you update the data in A component, let's assume you have one button here called modify in the A component. Here we have one button. Okay, so let me just add here one break statement. So we will get one line break here. Let's add one more break statement. So we got here some gap. Now if I click on this button, I want to update this data. So right now it is Kabir. I want to update it to AIT. So what I have to do, on click of this button, I have to call one function. In that function, I have to call my set state function. And inside this set state function, I have to pass the new value like AIT. Now if I go back here, right now if you see the value is Kabir here. But the moment I click on this button, it got updated to AIT. So you are modifying the data in A component, but it is getting reflected in D component as well. Why? Because you are using that data in the D component. So you are able to pass the data from A component to the D component using a context API concept. So if you see here, we just created our context. Then we went to the parent component, we imported our context. And using this context, we have rendered provider component. And to that we passed value props and we are storing our data. And we wrapped our child component inside the provider component. Now in any child, suppose in C also I want the data. What I will do? Simply I will import first my context. I will import use context from the React library. And then here I am going to call that use context, pass here my context. Now it returns data to me, and that data I will bind in the JSX of C component. Now if I go back and if I just check, you will see I got AIT. So here it's very, very simple. Now suppose if I refresh, in both the places I have Kabir. If I click on modify, AIT. So if you update the data in A component, it gets reflected in all the child components wherever it is used. So this is how we are going to use context API concept. So now we have done with our first step. Now let's see what is our second step. Now second step is configure the route path for all the links. So what we have to do here, first we have to create the links. And then to those links, we have to configure the route path. So let's see how we can do this part. So let me go back here and let me remove this styles. Yeah. So the second step is we have to go to our app.jsx. So let's remove this app class name from here. And here, let's create 4 links. So A*4, this is the shortcut way to create 4 links. We got here 4 anchor elements now. Now in each anchor elements, let's add the content. Here home, here I'm adding something like profile, and here I have something like products. Okay, let's skip 3 only. Yeah. So now let's go and check our browser how it looks. So here we got 4 links. Now let's add some styles to these links. Let's select our app.css, and here let me just give some name as app, and let's remove this CSS right now. So here we are going to say in our app, whatever anchor elements are there, to those anchor elements to increase the font size. Something like 21 pixel. Add the margin right. Something like 50 pixel. And let's add margin top, some 100 pixel, and not padding, that's it. Now let's go and check the output. It looks like this. So we have here home, profile, products, and let's add some padding for our app. So dot app, here let's add padding, something like 50 pixel. Now save it, and let's make texture decoration none for anchor elements. Now these are the basic styles we have added here. So now my requirement is very simple. If I click on home, here I want to render home component. If I click on profile, I want to render profile component. If I click on products, I want to render products component. This is what we want to do. So if I want here, I can just add text line center as well. So if I go back here, I got like this. So we have a very simple requirement. If I click on home, after this links, one home component should render. If I click on profile, profile component should render. If I click on products, products component should render. So based on my click of these links, the component should render here. So for this, what we need to do, we have to configure the route paths. Configuring the route paths is nothing but, if you observe here in the browser, right now this is our URL. So this is our port number. So after port number, we don't have anything. Now if I click on home, there is nothing. If I click on profile, there is nothing. If I click on products, there is nothing. So what I want after this port number, I want to add route paths here. So if I click on home, it should be slash. If I click on profile, it should be slash profile. If I click on products, here it should be slash products. So how to do? For that, we have to configure this route paths. So we are going to say to React, whenever user will click on home, just change the route path to slash. Whenever user will click on profile, change this route path to slash profile. Whenever user will click on products, change route path to slash products. Now save it, go back to the browser and check here. Now there is nothing means it is a slash. If I click on profile, it is a slash profile. If I click on product, slash product. If I click on home, I got nothing. Nothing means there is a empty slash. So we have done our step 2 also. Now what is step 3? Configure the route for every component. Now we have to tell to the React, hey React, whenever the route path is slash profile, you render here profile component. Whenever the route path is slash product, you render here product component. Whenever there is just empty slash, render here home component. Now how to tell? For that we have to configure route. So for that we should have all these components. So let's create all these components now. Now here I am creating one folder called routing. In that I will create home.jsx. Then I will create here profile.jsx. And let me create here something like product.jsx. Now instead of writing some UI, what we will do, we will take the help of ChatGPT. So let's go to the browser, let's open our ChatGPT, and let's ask ChatGPT, create a home component in reactjs with inline CSS. So it will just create some UI for us. We will just copy paste that UI in our files now. So it is created, copy the code, go back to your Visual Studio Code and let's paste in home.jsx file. Now save your file. Now again go back to the ChatGPT and ask for profile. Now it will give some code for us. So here we are not going to worry about what code it is. We are just going to see which component is rendering on the click of certain links. So copy this code. Again go back here and let paste here. Save it and again try for products here. Now it will create some UI for us. Now let's copy this and let's get back to our Visual Studio Code. Let's add in the products. Now three components are there. Now let's show these three components on our screen. So for that I am importing here home component. I will import profile component and I want to import products component. Now three components are rendered. Now here I will add some break statement and then one HR and again two break statements. Now let's see how it looks. It looks something like this now. Okay, now here we got this underline because of HR. Now let's go back to our Visual Studio Code and let's render here our home component, then profile component, and then products components. So right now what I'm doing, I'm rendering all the components. Now save it, go back here and check the output. So this is the profile component, sorry, home component. This is the profile component, and this is our products component. Now all the components are displaying, but we don't want to display all these components at a time. What we want, whenever user will click on home, then home component should be available. If user click on profile, only profile component should be there. If user click on products, only products component should be there. So based on which link user is clicking, only that components should be visible on my screen after this navbar. So for that, what we are going to do, we have to configure the route. How to configure the route? See here. Let's go to our Visual Studio Code. Now here, don't render all the three like this. Now we have installed React Router DOM. So from that React Router DOM package, we have to import one component called route. And now we have to render that route component. And using this route component, we have to tell to the React, hey React, based on my URL route path, you render this component. How you will tell? For that, we are going to use two props, path, and one more is here something called element. So now you will say, hey browser, hey React, whenever the route path is empty slash, you render here home component. In the same way, go to the route, one more time render, go to the route, render one more time. Again, you will say here same thing. Hey React, whenever in my browser URL, if the route path is slash profile, then you have to render a component called profile. In the same way, again we will say, hey React, whenever there is a path called slash products, then what you have to do, you have to render a element called products. So using these routes, you are giving that information. Using these routes, you are giving that information. So using first route, you are saying to the React, hey React, whenever there is a path called slash in my URL, whenever there is a path called slash in my URL, render home component. Whenever there is a path called slash profile, render profile component. Whenever the path is slash products, render products component. This is what we have to do when we say configure the route. Once we done the configuring of our route, Next, what we have to do, we have to wrap all our route inside the routes component. Whatever route component we have used, all those we have to wrap inside the routes component. Now this routes is also predefined component which is coming from React router doc. So let's go back here. What we have to do now, first we have to import routes component. And now all these route components, all this route, we have to render inside the routes. Like this, we have to render first routes, and inside that we have to add our route. This is what meaning of configuring. That's it. These are the minimum steps that we have to use to implement routing in our React applications. Now, if you go back to your browser, and if you see, now see, there is path is slash product, so it is showing component. Now, if I click on profile, it will show profile component. If I click on home, it will show home component. If I click on products, product. If I click on profile, profile. If I click on home, home. So we are able to switch from one component to another components. This is how we implement routing in our React applications. But here there is one problem. If you observe here, whenever I visit any link, my page is reloading. Whenever I click on any link, my page is reloading. So when we are building any single page applications, we should not reload our page on visiting new parts of our application or on click of links. So when I click on profile like this, my page should not reload. If I click on my link, my page should not reload. So what we have to do for this? For this, we have to implement one more step. What is that one more step? Replace all anchor elements with link component. So what we have to do, whatever anchor elements we have in our application, we have to replace it with the link component. And href attribute, we have to replace with our two props. So see here practically what we have to do. So let's go to our Visual Studio Code. Now these are the anchor elements. So first you import here one link component. And now all these anchor elements you have to change with the link component. And this href attribute you have to replace with two props. Save it, go back here. Now see, whenever I click on profile, my page is not reloading now. And see, the loading looks very fast now. So this is what we say routing in React application.
Let's understand API integration in React. So what is API integration? How we can do that API integration? So if you want to implement API integration in React, we have to use a library called Axios. Now what is the use of this library? Now using this library, we can implement API integration in React.js. So what is this Axios? So Axios is a promise-based JavaScript library for implementing API integration. So what is Axios? It is a promise-based library for implementing API integration. Now you can use this Axios in any Java-based application. Now it can be React, it can be React Native, it can be Node.js. In any Java-based applications, we can use this Axios. Now what it offers, let's try to understand. Axios helps us to do XML HTTP request from the browser. Using this Axios, we can do HTTP request from Node.js. It supports all the promise APIs. It helps us to intercept request and response. Intercept request and response is nothing but whenever we send a request, before it reaches to the destination, we can access that request, and if you want, you can modify that request before it reaches destination. And similar to that, response as well. So whenever a response is coming and before it reaches its destination, what we can do, we can access that response, we can modify it. That is the meaning of intercept. If you want, even you can cancel the request before it reaches your destination. So these are the things which are offered by Axios. Now let's understand how we can use this Axios in our React applications. So let's move to our VS Code. Now to work with Axios, first we have to install To work with Axios, first we have to install this Axios library. How to install? For that, we have to use npm install space Axios. The moment you say npm install Axios, Axios will be installed. Now, close this welcome file and come back to our folder structure. So now what is our plan? My plan is I want to design one React application. And we can have one backend application. Now that backend application might be built on Node.js, or it can be on Spring Boot, or it can be on Django. So let's assume that there is one backend application which is built on Node.js, and we have a database which is MongoDB. And in this database, let's assume that there are some 20 products data. Now my requirement is all these 20 products data I want to access in my React application and show each product in a card format. That is my requirement. So for that, what we have to do, from our React application, we have to send the request. From our React application, we have to send the request. And how we can send that request? Using Axios library. Now once we send the request from our React application to the backend application using Axios, now backend application will receive the request. It will connect with the database. Whatever 20 products you have, it will access that 20 products and it will give that 20 products back to React application as a response. It will give as a response. So if you want to send a request or if you want to receive a response, then we are going to use Axios library. Now, as a developer, if you want, as a front-end developer, if you want to send a request, you need three information from the back-end developers. The first, you need the REST API URL, using which you can send the request. Second, you need the type of that API. The URL belongs to which type of API. Third, we need the data format. Now, all this information will be given by a back-end developer. All this information will be given by a back-end developer. Okay, now let's take one use case. What we are going to do in our React application, let's assume that this is our React application. In this React application, we will create one component called products. We will create one component called products. Okay. Now in this products component, we will design one button here. Whenever user will click on this button, we are going to send one request to backend application. It means we should have one backend application. So what we are going to do now, whenever user will click on this button, we will send one request from our products component to this backend application. Now this backend application should connect with the database. It should connect with the database. And from that database, it should access all those 20 products. And those 20 products, this backend application should send to our products component as a response. And once we receive that, then we have to create one card for each product and we have to display that product's data. So how we can do this? Let's try to understand step by step. So the first step is we have to create one products component. Let's create one products component. So already we have a products component. So let's go back to that products.jsx file. So under routing, we have that products .jsx file. Now in this there is some code. So what we will do, we will remove this entire code from here. Let's remove this entire code. So I will remove all this entire code, or let me just remove this component itself and let me recreate it. So now this is empty products component, and let me add here one h1 and let me call it as a product component, or let me make it products. Here also products, here also we have to make it products. Now slight change I have to do in our routing part. So when we are importing as a products only. Okay, fine. Now let's get back here. Now here we have h1 and we will say products. Now if I save and go back to my browser and check, so here if I click on products, I got this products. Now what we want in this products, we want one button. So for that, here let me add products information as a title, and let's get back here, add some paragraph, some lorem 70, and let's create one simple button called get products. Get products. Now save it, go back to the browser, you will see that you got like this. Now my requirement is very simple. If I click on this button, one request should go to my backend. From there I should get the data, and then I should be able to show here some cards. Nothing but all that products information I can show in my cards. Suppose if I am receiving 20 products, then I have to create 20 cards here. So how to do that? Let's try to understand. So let's go to our Visual Studio Code. Now whenever I click on this button, I will call one function called get products. Now save it. Let's get back to our paint file. So here we have products component. Now we are going to call one function on the click of button. Now let's assume that this is our get products function. So whenever we click on the button, suppose if you have here one button, now whenever you will click on this button, you are going to call a function called get products. You are going to call a function called get products. From this function, we will call our useEffect library. So we have installed useEffect, right? So we will call useEffect library. Now what this useEffect library will do, it will send one request. It will send one request to the backend. It will send a request to the backend. Let's assume that here you have some backend. Here we have some backend. And backend will connect with the database. It will connect with the database. It will simply connect with the database. Now what this database will do, it will return some data to backend. Now backend will give that data to useEffect. useEffect internally creates one promise object. It will create one promise. And in that promise, it will store the data which is coming from backend. So now here backend is sending some data to useEffect. useEffect will create one promise. It will store that data in that promise, and then this promise will be returned from your useEffect to this function. Now what this function should do, it should access the data from the promise. It should access the data from the promise and store in the state of the component, It means in our products component, we will maintain one state now. Now whatever data we are getting from this useEffect, or whatever data we are accessing from the useEffect promise object, that data we will update in this state. And based on this state, we will show the data in our UI. This is what we are going to do. Okay. So till now what we have done, if you observe, we have created one component called products. In that we have one button and we have created one function. Now from here I have to call axios. So how to call axios? Let's see here. So what we have to do, first we have to import here axios from axios, and now we have to create that function called const get products, and here we have to simply use axios dot get, and here we have to pass the URL. We have to pass the URL. Now we don't have that URL, so that URL will be given by your backend team. So right now, who is this backend? Who is developing the backend? Because from here you have to send the request to backend. Now in our case, backend will be axios. Backend will be fake store API. So for that, let's go to the browser and let's search for here fakestoreapi.com. Now this website will act like a backend. It provides us some REST APIs. Go to the docs, click on products. Now here you have something like one URL. Copy this URL, get back to your application and paste that URL here. Now this is the URL to send the request. So we are using axios.get. Now axios is an object which we are accessing from axios library, and through that object we are accessing one get function and passing the URL. Now what this axios.get will do, it will send the request. It will send the request to backend. Now internally backend will connect with the database, and then database will send some data back to backend. Now backend will send that data back to axios. Now axios will create one promise, and in that promise data will be stored, and this axios is going to return that promise. Now once our get products receives promise, we have to access the data from promise. Now how to access the data from promise? For that, simply on this get we have to call then and catch. Now then we'll take one callback function, and catch will take one callback function. Now here we can take one response object, and here simply we are going to access the data. How to access? For that, you can simply say console.log of response.data. Let's see what data it will return to us, and if there is any error, we will try to alert. We will say something went wrong, and what went wrong, that we will try to console.log of error. Okay, now let's get back to our application, and then let's get back to the products. Now here let's inspect, and now click on this. The moment you click on this, now see you got some data. Now here you are receiving one array, in that we have 20 products. Now this data I want to store in my state. How to store? For that, let's go to our component. Here we will maintain one state. In that state we will store the data. So for that, how to maintain the state we know. So let's import here useState hook, and let's render const, let's say state comma set state equals to useState. Initially we will maintain empty array, and now once we get the response, we will update our state using response.data. Now state gets updated, and now based on this state data, we have to create UI. How to do that? For that, let's go to our VS Code. Here after this button, we will create one div, and this div I want to show only if I get the data from the backend. So I will write one condition. If my state dot length is greater than 0, then only show this div. Then only show the div. In this div, what we can do? In this div, we can create one card. So to create one card based on our data, we can again use this state dot, we can say map. We can use map function. So this map function will help us to iterate through each element of this state and create some UI. So state.map, add one callback function here and add a return statement. And let's create one card. For that we will take div with a class called card. In that we will add the image. We will add here one h3 as a product name, and let's add one price, and here let's add some description, and let's add one button called product details. How to show this UI in a card format? What we are going to do, we will go to our CSS. Here I will select dot card. I'm just going to my global CSS file, and I will say width should be 270 pixel. Padding should be 10 pixel. Box shadow should be around 10 pixel black. Let me add here some height, or height is not required. Text to align, I will say center. So some CSS I have added here. Now let's go back here, and to this image let's assign width as 100%, and height we can assign something like 200. And now we have to get the data. How to get the data? Here we can say product. So what this map will do, from this state it will pick the first element and it will store here, which is object type. Okay, now if you go to the browser and if you expand at least one object, you will understand what properties you are getting. So you are getting the product category name, product description, product ID, product image URL, product price, product title, and rating. So what we can do, simply here we can say that here we want product dot, or we can simply destructure it. So I'm just adding here destructuring concept, and I will say I want image, I want title, and here I want rate. I think rating it is, and apart from that, image, title, rating, and description we need. Description. Now we can add that image here, and then we can pass title. Here let's add price. We wanted to add price here, so but we did not destructure price. Let's destructure price, and let's add here description, and from this description we will use slice, and we will just display only few characters, and then that's it. Now let's check how it looks. Let's go to the browser, and now suppose if I click on this get products, so here we got the cards. So now see description, we will try to display a little bit more, and here I will say instead of 2180 characters. Save, go back here, we got like this. And even heading also we will slice little bit. I will slice here something like 0 to 21. Now if I go back here, I got like this. But if you see, all the cards are displaying one after another. So for this, what we can do, on our main div, here we can add a class called products, and we can select that products, and simply we can add display flex wrap. We will say wrap. We will use margin auto, and we will decrease the width to 1100 pixel, and what else? Yeah, let's check. So we got like this, let's add here justify content space evenly, and let's add gap 20 pixel. So now if I go back and check, I got like this. Okay, now let's add little bit margin also. Margin top, we will add something like 50 pixel. So we got some space. Now see, whenever I click on home, there is home page. If I click on profile, profile. If I click on products, I got product. Now if I click on this button, I will get the data from the backend. Now how we got this data? This data we got using API integration. We have just integrated one API with our React application. And who developed that API? That API is developed by Fake Store API. So when you start learning backend, there you will learn how to create this REST APIs. What are the different types of APIs you can create? All those things you will learn in the backend. But right now in front end, we just need to know how we can integrate our APIs of backend with our React application. Now it doesn't matter that APIs are developed in which language. Now it can be Java, it can be JavaScript, it can be Python. It can be anything that doesn't need for us. So as a front-end developer, we just need the URL. So this is how we have to understand the entire flow with the architecture. So this is about API integration in React application. Let's understand how we can manage forms in React.js. Now there are two ways to manage the forms in React.js. One is called controlled way and another one is called uncontrolled way. Any component which consists of forms, and if you are managing that form using state concept of React, then such components are called controlled components. In the same way, if you are managing a form using any other concept of or any other technique of React, maybe using useRef or maybe using directly DOM manipulation or maybe by using some third-party libraries, in that case, that component is called uncontrolled components. So now let's try to understand how we can create forms and how we can manage the forms using both ways. Okay, so let's create one simple form which consists of three input fields like username, email and password. Okay, so let's get back to our Visual Studio Code. Now here I am simply creating one subfolder called forms, and in this forms I will create one comp file called controlled form.jsx, and let's create one component here. So we got here a component. Now in this I want to create one form. So for that I will take one form tag. So right now action is not required for us, and let me take 3 divs, and in each div I will take one input element with a placeholder called username. In the same way, I will take one more input element, and here I will call placeholder as password email. And let's take one more input element with the type password, and username also we will make it password. And let's add one simple button. So with some type equals to button, something called submit. So we have created one simple form. Now to this form I want to add some CSS, so I will just add here class name as a form and get back to our global CSS. Let's select here dot form, and let's decrease the width something like 270 pixel, or not 270, this time we will make it 370 pixel. Let's add margin 50 pixel auto, padding 20 pixel, text align center, And apart from that, what else we can do? Box shadow 0 0 10 pixel. Let's add here green. And now let's render this component in our app and let's check how it looks. So for this, let's create one link called forms, and for 2 I will say /form, and let's add here a form. And now let's add one simple route. So whenever it is a /forms, we want to show here form, controlled form component. So controlled form component, make sure it is imported. And now let's get back to the browser and check. We got one link called forms. If I click on this, I got here nothing right now. Now let me just check. When I click on here forms, see here it is forms and here we have written form. So let me change it to forms and let me get back here and click on this again forms. I got like this. Now let's add some more CSS here. So here I will add one heading first. I will say H2. I will say controlled forms, and let's go to the CSS and we will say in our form whatever div we have. Now to that div we can add margin bottom 30 pixel. So if I go and check how it looks, we got like this. Now 30 looks so much. We can add here 20 pixel, or we can make it 13 pixel and go and check. We got like this. So one simple form we got. Now what my requirement is, whenever I click on this button after entering my data, then this form data I want to print in my console. I want to print that form data in my console. So for that, whenever user will enter here, for example Sagar, what you need to do, you have to access the data from this text box. So for this, we will go to our component and here we will maintain one state. For that, we will import useState hook const equals to useState. And in this useState, we will maintain one object, and in that object, we will maintain three properties: username as a empty, email empty, password empty. And here we will say user comma set user. Okay, so now what I want to do, whenever user will type something in this text box, whenever he is typing something in that text box, we want to get that data. So let's see here, we got it. Now here if there is anything going wrong, let's check what is the mistake we are doing. Password is not defined, it is saying. So let me just check why it is saying password is not defined. Okay, here password. Okay, fine. Now let's get back here, and now we got it. So now what I want, whenever I type here one character called yes, then I want to access this character the moment I type it and store inside this username's property value. Here I want to store that yes. Suppose if I type here a, then what I want to do, I want to extract this yes a, I want to remove current yes and add here yes a. So like this, if you want to do, what you have to do is, to your input element, first you have to assign value attribute. And to this value attribute, you have to assign this property. How to assign? For that, simply we will say user.username. Or here we will just keep it as a name. We will remove here name. This is the first thing. Second, to this input, you have to assign one onChange event listener. And to that we have to assign one function called event handler. Now I don't have this function, so simply define that function. handle form. Now this handle form function will have access to one event object as we know in JavaScript. So that event object I have taken. Now whatever changes I will do in this text box, this function will be called handle form. Now whenever this handle form function is called, what I want to do, I want to create one object, and in that object I want to copy the current state properties. All these properties I want to copy. So for that we can use spread operator and we can say user. And once you have copied it, then I want to update name with event dot target dot value. This is what I want to do. So I have said handle form. Instead of handle form, here I can give handle name field also I can add. And now same function name I can assign here as well. Now in the same way what we want to do for pass email also we want to do. So first we will add value equals to, we will say user dot email. Then we are going to add here on change and we will say handle email field. Now we don't have this function handle email field, so let's create that function. So copy it and paste here. Copy, so here we have to say handle email field and simply we have to add here email. Same way I have to do for password also. I will just add one function and I will say here password. And here simply I will add password. That's it. Now to the password also we have to add here value props, nothing but value attribute, and to that we have to assign user dot password. And then here we have to add on change and we have to add function handle password field. And now whenever you click on this button on click, we have to call handle submit function. Now let's get back here and let's define one function called const handle submit. And let's define one function and let's do console.log of our state. Now let's check whether we are able to access the data from that fields and print in the console or not. So for that let's go to our browser, let's open the terminal, inspect, go to the console, clear all this and let's add here. I'm adding, see here I'm just typing something, it's not, so here I'm not able to type anything. So let me just check if anything is going wrong. Acha. So right now what we have done, we just created an object. Now this object we have to update in our state. So for that here we have to call set user. And to this set user we have to pass this obj. Here also we have to call set user and then we have to pass obj. Here also we have to call set user and then we have to store in the obj. Now save it. Now get back here. Now type here something. It is typed Sagar. I'm adding here sagar@gmail.com and password I am just passing 12345 and click on submit. The moment I click on submit, now if you see one object is printed and to all those fields proper values are assigned. So how we managed this form, how we are able to access the data from this form using this state concept. So in this case, now this component is called controlled component. So in most of the interviews, they will ask what is controlled component in React. Okay. So this is how we manage the form using state concept in React. So now let's try to understand how we can manage the forms using uncontrolled way. So for this, we are going to use the concept of useRef hook in React. So first, let's create a UI. Let's get back to our Visual Studio Code. Let's create here one file called uncontrolled form.jsx. Now here, whatever UI we have created for control form, same thing we will do here. We'll just copy the same JSX code. And let's get back here. Let's create one simple component